And we're back. This is part 2 of the Shake Test Soil Lab. I've got 4 samples here that the students did a couple of weeks ago so that you can kind of get an idea of the different layers that we see in the samples. This one right here, this is actually a sample of potting soil that one of the students brought in. All of this that's at the top is organic matter that has swollen up and floated to the top. You can see that the liquid has this kind of yellowish color, and then on the bottom here you've actually got 4 layers. Now I'm going to use the camera here. I'm going to zoom you in so you can see a little better. There you go. Oh yeah, now I can see it in the camera. Alright, so get my pointer here. This layer on top is all organic matter that's fallen out of the water column and landed on top of the sample. We have a clay layer, we have a silt layer, and then from here to the bottom we have a sand layer. And this is almost in perfect proportions. You can see the sand is just a little bit more, but we end up with, according to our soil triangle, this particular one came in as a sandy clay loam. Not quite a loam, but as a kind of a sandy clay loam in the end. And this one settled quite a bit. I think if we went back and remeasured this, this would come in as more of a loamy type of a potting soil. But this is actual potting soil that you can buy in the supermarket. This is a good one, by the way. There's a lot of perlite and stuff at the top. But this is organic matter that's resting on the top. Here's your clay, here's your silt, here's your sand layer towards the bottom. Okay, moving over. Let me zoom out a little bit. Okay, we have this one that was brought in by another student. Let me loosen this up here. This is more typical of what happens here in the southwestern United States. Now, if you're watching this video, if you live in the Pacific Northwest, if you live in the Midwest, or if you live east of the Mississippi River, out here in the Southwest we have a lot of bare soil. And so what's happened here is this is what we see more typically in our soil samples. We see this more clear water column. There's a little bit of organic matter, some grass, some leaves on top, but if you were to kind of look down on the top of this sample, you can see that it's fairly barren there. There's not a lot on it. It's kind of desolate. And so if we zoom in, right about there, let me loosen that up a little bit and look down. On this one, we see the particles of sand. These large particles go to right about here. And then from here up, it's pretty much all the same color. In this case, this is about half and half silt and sand. Usually we would see a light color on top here in the Southwest, and you'll see one of those in just a minute, where I can show you the clay layer and how it looks here in the Southwest. And the reason that this water is not perfectly clear is because there's still clay particles that are held in suspension in the water column, and they've not settled out yet. And they probably won't settle out for another week or two. So this is more typical of what we're seeing. In this case, this came out of one of our students' yards at his house. So now we're going to tilt back a little bit. Here's another sample that came to us. Now this one, they got a lot of grass, and this one has a couple of distinctive things about it. It's got a darker layer. It's got more of a darker silt layer here. So let's zoom in on this one so we can see the different layers and what we're looking at. Alright, in this particular one, the sand layer starts at the bottom. You can look through the glass and you can see large particles of sand that continue up to right in this neighborhood. And then it goes up and it gets dark here at the top. Now this dark layer is still part of the silt column. Although it is a distinctive layer, here at the top. If I had to give this a choice, I would call this sand from here to the bottom. I would call this the silt layer, and then you see this really tiny white line across the top. This is the clay layer that's in this particular sample. In the Southwest, our clay shows up as this very light line across the top. So this one's a very, as you can see, typical for the Southwest. It's a very sandy sample. Let's move over a little bit. Let me back you out so you can see this one. Now this one's the oddball of our samples that was brought in. In this case, notice just the color change. Here's the sample we just did. It's settling in quite nicely. Here's the sample we just looked at, a little bit more brown, and then you have this one. This particular sample right here is indicative of some of the soils that we have. And in this one, I would almost suspect that this one is primarily a clay, or what we call a caliche type soil. Caliche soil here in the Southwest is a type of soil that people like to have on their roads because actually when it gets wet, it turns more, and it hardens a couple of times, it turns more into a concrete. And it gets very hard, and they like to use it on the top of the roads when they blade the roads out because it doesn't get quite as muddy as other road features out here in the Southwest. And like I said, if you can have caliche soil for roads, if you can get to open up a caliche pit, you're in business. People are going to beat a path to your door out in this neighborhood. All right, so let's zoom in on this one. As you can see, in this one, we have some sand particles. Just a few floating in there, but most of this is not like you see next door where we actually see the particles, the silica particles. This one is more of a uniform, all the way from the bottom, all the way up to the top. I had a hard time classifying this one. And if somebody wants to offer me some suggestions on this, please feel free to do so. But I called this one almost entirely a sand or mostly a clay because I'm seeing mostly tiny little particles in here. I'm not seeing a lot of the large particles like we did in the all sand ones. So this one's our oddball sample. Now let's go back, before we leave this particular lab, let's go back and check the sample that we just did. So I'm going to back out here and we're going to move over a little bit. Here's our sample that we just did. Now we've been doing this now for about 25 minutes from start to finish. And as you can see, our water column is starting to clear quite nicely. We have things that are settling out. In this particular sample, if I zoom in a little bit more, you can see that this is sand quite high in here. I'm seeing sand particles from the bottom going up to right in this neighborhood, and then I'm seeing more of a uniform layer that's not quite as large. I would call that the silt, and I'm not seeing any clay starting across the top like I did before. Maybe just a very light line here at the top. So we're going to come back in the morning when I get here about 6:30, 6:45, and we're going to check this one again and see where we're at. So, recapping, this is just simply a shake test. This is soil put in a jar. Shake it up after you've added water. Set it down. Let it settle. See where the particles fall out. We want to try and see, like we did in our potting soil sample here, we want to try and see the distinct layers if we can. That helps us a lot. Or we want to see where do the larger, whoops, let me back up a little bit. Back up, refocus, there we go. We want to see where those larger particles at the bottom give way to the more uniform layer on the top. It goes from our sand to our silt. And then if we have that light line across the top, like we do there, then we have clay in our sample. So, shake test. This is a quick, easy, relatively painless, not very messy lab that you can do with your classes or students. You can do this on your own and find out what is your soil type that you have at home. And again, the soil triangle, which is this right here. Your soil triangle is something that you can download from offline, or if I can get that out, you can actually get a screenshot of that and use it if you'd like. And we use the soil triangle to determine our basic soil type, and then we go from there. Stay tuned for part 3, coming up in about, let's do this again in about 14 hours from now. See you then.